Hey everybody, it's Matthew. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are back to our normal video schedule of once a week, hopefully. I know that Black Hole Sun cover took a long time to come out, but we're back to the normal schedule, and we're going to start off today by reacting to some articles, and one article in particular we're going to look at today is Loudwire's 20 of the cheapest rock and metal albums ever made. So we're going to take a look at these albums here and learn what kind of magic these bands were able to create with just a tiny bit of money available to work on these records. And if you notice things looking slightly different, like the headrest behind me, I'm currently sitting in my power wheelchair instead today because of reasons that I'm not going to get into. But anyway, let's get into the article right now and react to these albums. Starting off with Black Sabbath, which is of course considered the first heavy metal album here. And it says, released in 1970, when Black Sabbath was given £1,000 to make their debut album, they thought they'd hit the big time. Each band member got £100 each to pay off their own respective debts. I thought I was rich, Ozzy told Metal Hammer. I spent some of the money on a pair of shoes. I used to go around barefoot at the time because I literally couldn't afford shoes. That left them with just a
tiny £600
to record the rest of the album. And of course, the rest of is history. We know the influence these guys had, and it's pretty awesome. They got it done with just £600, which today, of course, is a little bit more money than that because of inflation, but that's still a pretty tiny amount of money. Going to Nirvana here with Bleach. In total, it cost Nirvana exactly, we have exact change here, $606.17, because apparently we were able to know what the actual bill was for the production time and the studio time, and Jack and Dito billed them for a mere 30 hours of studio time, and that was all that they needed to make one of the most influential, one of of course the big one would be Nevermind, which had quite a bit more money obviously than that, but not bad for a first start for something that changed the world. And we look at Bob Dylan, which is interesting for a Loudwire thing. In 1962, on his self-titled debut album, he spent just 6 hours in the studio, spread over 2 days, and that was all he needed for a grand total of $402 spent on this album, which is a little over $4,000 today, adjusted for inflation, which is still a pretty small amount of money. And then we have Boston 1976, which apparently is a little bit of a technicality because the album itself was not cheaply made. But before they had the record company involved, they were working with a very limited budget with the duo of Tom Scholz and Brad Delp, or working in Tom's basement apartment with their own engineering equipment. So, of course, the original plan was for them, I guess, to continue doing that until Epic Records came in and, of course, gave them the proper resources to actually do this. But, of course, Tom quipped in 1998 that he said, "I don't think it's important enough to have a $2,000 microphone on your acoustic guitar. That's actually a pain in the ass." He's basically saying there's no point in using that expensive equipment. Use what you have around you. And the White Stripes, this is not their debut album. This is Distigal. I don't know how to exactly to say this, but it's from 2000. Their debut album was recorded in studio, but for their sophomore release here, it was recorded in Jack White's living room for just $500. Now we think about it, this is 2000 now, so this is the most recent album we've dealt with, and they spent $500 in 2000 on this, which is very cheap so far. We haven't seen it at this level of frugality yet on this list. Let's keep looking here. Kiss, Dressed to Kill. This one is a big deal here. Kiss is a pretty massive band that is loved by a lot of people. Not me, but they're a very important band. So, of course, in 1975, the band wasn't that famous yet. Their first 2 albums did not do pretty well, so they didn't have a lot of money going in for this third one here. And the band had to produce it themselves because they couldn't afford to hire a producer. And it says, and although the title of the album is Dressed to Kill, Peter Criss was the only person in the band who actually owned a suit. The other guys had to borrow theirs. Pretty amazing how these guys had albums that didn't do well, had no money for an album, did the album themselves, and didn't even have all the suits that they had for the stupid album cover themselves. And then they turned into one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Metallica. I'm going to complain on this one. It says, considering that some early 80s albums racked up bills for $1 million, yeah, this is Metallica's first album. They had an EP come out before this, and that was it in 1982. They were selling copies of their demo, No Life Till Leather, and yet they had $15,000 to record this, and they say that seems like pennies in comparison. I'm like, it's the band's first full-length album on this list when we've had bands that didn't even spend $1,000 on theirs, and we're putting this on here and $15,000. Dude, that's a lot of money. Like, this is dumb. I mean, they had to work hard to get to the point to be able to make this album, but look, man, $15,000. Come on. And then Led Zeppelin, one of the greatest albums of all time in 1969. And it helped that they had a pretty clear vision of what was going on with the album when they went in, so it didn't take them long. It only took them about 30 hours to make this, just like it did for Nirvana with Bleach. And it cost them £1,782. Now, this is, again, a little bit more money than some of the previous efforts we've seen, but this is Led Zeppelin. This album is pretty huge. And when you look at the amount they spent on this versus the total payoff, that's nothing if we talk about what this album created. This is a little bit of a weird one. The Velvet Underground. Now, I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Lou Reed. I'm not really, and I don't know really anything about the Velvet Underground. But the reason this is here is because this was a live album, live at Max's in Kansas City. It was recorded by a woman, it says here, named Bridget Polk, on a portable cassette recorder she had brought alone to the venue, which literally means this album was recorded for $0, basically. And I don't think she was paid to record this. It doesn't say if she was or not, so we don't know. It basically means that this album was made for no money, essentially, except for, whatever had to be done to get the album ready to be released, which we're not going to really know that information here. But that's the most bare bones thing so far, is a single cassette recorder that recorded the entire show. And then Poison, I'm not even going to talk about this. Some of the 23,000 they had came from the band members themselves, which is cool that they put it out themselves. But $23,000, 12 days, and Bret Michaels later referred to as a glorified demo. I haven't been saying the album names. Let's look what the Cat tracked in 1986. I mean, if that's how he feels about that, I don't think this album should really be on here. That's kind of goofy. In 1986, 23 grand. That's a pretty good amount of money. Also, I hate this album cover. Paul McCartney's debut album, McCartney, 1970. Some of Paul McCartney's debut solo album was recorded in studios, but a lot of it was made in his house in London with a spare set of equipment in his home studio. They asked him what he had. He said a Studer 4-track machine, and he only had one mic, and he didn't have VU monitors or a mixer, which meant everything had to be listened to first for distortion and then recorded, so that he didn't blow out his track machine, which is very bare bones. You can see the progression of this. There are guys later that would use 4 tracks to record demos in their house, but not, stuff for a full album, because back in 1970, obviously you didn't have as much as far as home studio equipment goes. So that's a pretty bare bones setup there. And it would cost him, whatever his equipment was, but I imagine he probably already had all this stuff in his house. Didn't really cost anything for him to do those parts. And Elvis Costello, My Aim Is True, 1977. When Elvis recorded his debut album, he was still working his day job as a computer programmer for the cosmetic company's Elizabeth Arden. But he would regularly call in sick instead of work on his music. And he said, we were able to cut all of My Aim Is True in a series of 6 4-hour sessions at a cost of about £1,000. Said overdubs were barely an option. Everything is heard pretty much as it was played. So this was a very quick get in, get out kind of record. £1,000 in 1977. Not a bad feat there. That's pretty cheap as all things considered. Elvis Costello is a bit of a cult following type of guy. I mean, he's not a big name that people would normally think of, but he does have, quite a bit of influence in, I feel like, the indie and punk rock genres that would come later. Bruce Springsteen, Nebraska, 1982. Bruce sat in his home in Colts Neck, New Jersey with a 4-track cassette recorder. It's back. That cost $1,050. As he sketched out songs, he assumed the material would be used for another E Street Band album. He took these demos to the studio where he found they simply didn't work with the full band. And he then realized They were essentially complete as they were, and those 10 of the 15 songs he demoed at home became the album Nebraska, and that was it. So it only cost him what the fortune. Although this doesn't say if he published the demos as the album or if they were re-recorded later. So we don't actually know what the cost of this would have actually been. But if it's the case that he did just kind of put the demos on the album, then that's basically what it cost. Joe Satriani, Not of This Earth, 1986. He maxed out his $5,000 credit card in order to fund his album. And that was the way I got discounts from all the local studios, was to pay everybody up front with the specs that came from the credit card. This is back when they used to just mail you credit cards in the 80s. And he had to do session work to get that debt paid off. Not bad, one credit card and a dream. And here comes one of the greatest, if not the greatest, instrumental guitarist of all time. Although Guthrie Govan is some strong competition, and I would say may surpass Joe Satriani in ways, but just a piece of plastic does sound like a pretty thrifty way to have made an album. The Beatles, Please Please Me. Of course, back in the early Beatles days, they didn't have a lot of money to get their albums done, and there was a ton of albums that they did, so they had to use their money pretty wisely. You know, in 1967, they made Sgt. Pepper's, which cost a lot of money, really significant. But of course here, 4 years before, they made this album for just $400, and they got it done in less than 10 hours. And this is one of their most popular albums. It has some of the songs that people really like on it, so that's a pretty big impact for just those 400 pounds. The Ramones, if it's one thing they were, it says it was rough around the edges, and they certainly didn't need a blockbuster budget to make their debut. Using a little over $6,000 in 7 days of studio time, they made 1976's Ramones. Even shooting the cover image was an affordable endeavor, just costing $125. For a punk band, $6,000 in 7 days seems like a lot, if I'm honest. It's kind of not the ethos, right? I would think they'd be able to get those songs done a little bit quicker than that and for less money, but you know, it's one of the earliest punk albums, big influence. So, because if we look at the impact versus what it cost, then, you know, it's not a lot of money in comparison to that. And Rush in 1974. The exact amount of money they had isn't clear, but one thing is sure, they used to scrimp and pinch every penny and minute they had. I remember how exciting it was to be in the studio, even though we could barely afford it, said guitarist Alec Lifeson in 2023. We spent 2 days recording. We finished playing in a club at 1 a.m. and we'd have the studio till 9 a.m. When the next session started. It was the only way we could afford it. So yeah, you can get a discount, I think, if you're in there from, 1 to 9 a.m. What terrible hours. Good Lord. I haven't heard this album, so I wonder what the quality of music was, because if it was some of the progressive stuff they were doing, 2 days is not a lot of time to get complicated music done. So that's honestly pretty impressive that they did it that quick. The Black Keys' Big Come Up album I know very well because I was very obsessed with the Black Keys when I was younger. I really love this band. I bought 2 albums when I first heard them. I bought this one, which of course I didn't buy when it came out because I was only 8 years old then. And then I bought El Camino at the same time, and I played crap out of those things and loved every minute of it. I really like this album because it's such a raw blues garage sounding thing, and it's really fun. Let's see what they say. They were obviously not wealthy. They were teenagers in the early 2000s in Akron, Ohio. And Patrick Carney, the drummer, scraped together enough money to buy a Korg D12 recording machine, which he and Dan set up in his basement. They were poor middle-class kids. Carney said to Flood Magazine to 2022, at this point we were all broke because we were working shitty jobs, so it was kind of a big deal that I got this thing because none of our other friends had anything like it. And the machine, plus 2 microphones bought off eBay, were the only things they needed to record this record. I'm wondering, how did you buy the drum kit? Did they just put one mic in front of it and then the other one's in front of Dan's amp and that's it? Dude, that's pretty nuts. It doesn't say what he paid for this, but if it's a Korg, that it's D12, I don't know for sure. I don't think that would have been a particularly expensive one. So that's kind of impressive that they managed to put that thing together. Oh, look, Iron Maiden, the Soundhouse tapes. Ooh, an Iron Maiden record. This is before some of their bigger stuff came out. Before their first full-length album, Iron Maiden put an EP out titled The Soundhouse State that cost them £200 to put together. The money was used to book the one weekend of studio time where the band recorded 4 songs: Prowler, Invasion, Strange World, and Iron Maiden. They could not afford the extra £50 it was going to cost to mix it, and so the recordings were put out as is. It still worked out in their favor, given the EP helped them land their first real record deal. And when you think about that, $200 to get the attention of record labels and get their first deal to make their debut album, which of course was huge. Like, this is the most thrifty, crazy thing that is on this list, because that is the most enormous payoff I think I've ever seen. Motley Crue, Too Fast for Love. I don't like this. For the small sum of $2,500, as well as a hookup between Tommy Lee and the studio manager, Motley Crue was able to record their debut album, Too Fast for Love. We were all in relationships at the time, except for Tommy. The manager at Hit City West Studio was this girl, Vince Neil recalled. She wasn't very attractive, but we made Tommy do her for some free recording time. What the fuck? Ew. Dude, that's stupid. I hate this. This is very Motley Crue, but what the fuck? Anyway, I guess anything to get the album done, $2,500. I mean, you guys could have done it for less money, maybe. I don't know. Considering it's Motley Crue in the 80s here, though, that isn't a lot of money, if we're honest, because a lot of these kind of bands were getting a lot of money to do these things in the 80s. So that's pretty good. And then the rest of the free recording time that they were able to acquire through certain means. But that's not the best one here. The best one still, if we're talking about payoff in the future, it's the Iron Maiden one. That's ridiculous. But then what is the, I wonder what is the cheapest one here? Probably this one is the most ridiculous, £400. I mean, it is 1963, but that is less money than Bob Dylan's debut album, which was a year before. So I would call this a win for the Fab Four. So I think that's probably the most standout one in this list. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for the list, though. Hope you guys enjoyed this review of 20 of the cheapest rock and metal albums ever made, courtesy of Loudwire here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, of course, if you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below if you like. Maybe leave some albums you might know of that were also done cheaply to add to this list here. And then, of course, don't forget to click the bell so that you get notifications when a new video comes out on the channel. And with that, I will see you guys next time in another video. Have a good one.